Good evening. You're watching The Digital Age. I'm James Zirin. Tonight's show is a special one. About what? Of course, the national election. The bloggers have called the race for Obama and even tell us by how much will be his margin of victory. Are the bloggers correct? Did they get it right? Will the presidential race be accurately called on the blogosphere? Here to answer this question is a prime Democratic pollster. He is Doug Schoen, the author of the best-selling book, Declaring Independence, The Beginning of the End of the Two-Party System, an advisor to President Clinton from 1994 to 2000, and we're happy to welcome him back to the digital age.
Jim, thank you for having me.
Now, all the smart money say it's Obama. Do you think there's any hope for John McCain?
Well, you know, this morning I looked at the electoral map, and it's a daunting challenge for McCain. I never say never in politics, but he would have to win states he's now trailing by double digits to win the election.
Do you think there's any parallel between the matchup between McCain and Obama and any other presidential election we've seen?
Well, the only one that I go back to is, I guess, Kennedy and Nixon, or perhaps Ford and Carter, where you had a relatively inexperienced outsider winning on a change theme, on empowering a new generation. And certainly in John F. Kennedy's case, that would be a clear model to use. But Nixon was not as unpopular as George Bush and John McCain's policies appear to be, though I also think Barack Obama has come from a more distant point and is a more improbable nominee and perhaps president than John F. Kennedy was.
Of course, we have the matchup between Jimmy Carter and Ronald Reagan, where the country really wasn't that used to Reagan. They thought of him as something of a retired actor who'd become the governor. Carter was kind of a known quantity. No one was terribly excited about him, but no, he wasn't that unpopular either. And at first, Carter was ahead in the polls, and then Reagan caught fire and won the race.
Couple of, I think, specific factors there. First, I remember well, I think you probably do as well, the debate the Thursday night before, which gave people a clear sense that Ronald Reagan was acceptable and was a clear alternative to Jimmy Carter. And I think it also became clear the last weekend that last-ditch efforts to get the hostages out were not going to succeed. And given the economic problems America had faced in the period during 79 and 80, I think there was a clear recollection, or I have a clear recollection, that the electorate said, you know, we need change. Now, those sentiments crystallized late for the reasons you suggested, but I think there was a large-scale movement the last weekend to Ronald Reagan.
Do you think McCain ever had a chance? I mean, after all, in light of Bush's unpopularity, the fact that tremendous preponderance of Americans identified with the Democratic Party rather than the Republican Party. I mean, Bloomberg last May had Obama over McCain by 6 points even before Obama had the nomination.
Well, I'd say a couple of things. First, it was a long shot for John McCain. I think, Jim, he made a mistake. I think he should have picked more of a centrist as his running mate, perhaps the owner of Bloomberg, Michael Bloomberg, or Joe Lieberman forged a real bipartisan ticket, or even Governor Tom Ridge of Pennsylvania. He's trying to win Pennsylvania, and it strikes me that Tom Ridge would have been a more effective advocate of John McCain in Pennsylvania than Sarah Palin.
Well, do you think he could have gotten away with it, with the social conservatives dominating the machinery of the Republican Party?
You know, a good question. And my response is that had John McCain said the following, look, we're going to do it my way. And if you don't want to do it my way, if you want to have a floor fight and think you can defeat me, that's certainly your right at the convention. But let me be very clear. If my choice, whether it be Ridge or Bloomberg or Lieberman, is not nominated, you'll find another nominee. I suspect had John McCain done that and forged a real bipartisan ticket and run on a platform or program of national reconciliation, salvation, bipartisan approaches to problems, he would have been more competitive than he's proven to be.
Or the ticket may have been Huckabee and Palin if they'd called his bluff.
You know, I think if that had been the case, Barack Obama would probably have gotten close to 60%, and America would be better off for it.
Was there a more institutional, intrinsic problem with McCain that he really didn't bring to the voters a clear vision about where he wanted to take the country and how he was going to do it in a time of trouble? Absolutely.
I think the McCain campaign has been one tactic after another. We haven't had a clear sense as to what his goals, aspirations, strategy, your word, vision is, and I think that he suffered. I also think, Jim, if you look at what happened the week of the bailout, when he suspended his campaign, went to Washington to work on the bailout, didn't get much done, retreated to his headquarters, all the while saying that he would not participate in the debate, only to go to Florida, to go to Memphis, I think it was, to participate in the debate. And so he reversed himself, didn't participate, and appeared really not only without a vision, but I think flailing around in ways that did himself harm.
Do you think there's been a defining moment in the campaign? Is there something you can point to where you could say that's where McCain lost it?
I think that week of the vote on the first bailout, combined with the precipitous decline in the stock market. And I'm one of those who probably believes the decline in the markets made it very tough, if not impossible, for John McCain to win. But to return to your point, if he had had a vision, if he'd been running a bipartisan campaign, if he had had a response to the economic crisis that was perceived as being better than the one that he offered, he might have been much more competitive now than he's proven to be.
Now, a recent CBS New York Times poll on the policies of the candidates said that 59% of those polled believed that McCain favored the rich, and only 11% of those polled said he favored the middle class. Was part of his problem that he really couldn't relate to the middle class? Usually that's a fertile ground for Republicans.
Elections are won in the middle. And if a candidate is perceived as representing the rich, and I think McCain, by advocating continuation of the Bush tax cuts at a time of record deficit, certainly fits that bill. I think that that was, again, a serious problem with his candidacy that he never successfully resolved. Obama, I think, has been successful in making the alternative case.
Now, usually rough economic times favor the Democrats, particularly where there's a Republican, an unpopular Republican in the White House. But has Obama gotten enough credit for his economic policies, and has McCain gotten enough blame, really, in the media for his handling of the economy issue?
I think the answer to that is yes. I mean, Barack Obama is ahead in the polls on who's better on fiscal issues generally and on taxes in particular. And John McCain is perceived as being too close to Bush and his failed economic policies. So I think the economy has ultimately worked to Obama's benefit in the way that you suggest it traditionally does.
I think when you were last here, you indicated that had there been a terrorist attack on the United States, God forbid, that that would have redounded to the benefit of the Republicans. And so the downturn in the economy redounds to the benefit of the Democrats.
First of all, fortunately, there has been no terrorist attack, and we all hope and pray there won't be. But sadly, the unprecedented downturn in the economy that we've seen has almost certainly benefited the Democrats, who are poised not only, I think, to win the presidency, but substantial majorities in the House and Senate as well.
Well, we'll get to that, particularly the Senate, in a moment. But let's look at some of the events of the campaign and how they may have affected the tide of battle with public opinion. What about the Powell endorsement, which came late in the campaign? Do you think that really made a difference?
I don't think it makes a big difference, but I think that it undercut McCain's argument that Obama's not really prepared to be president. I also think that the Powell endorsement took some of the air out of the McCain campaign for a couple of days. And I think that it just provided a useful palliative to the increasingly shrill attacks that McCain was leveling against Obama.
Because Powell said he didn't like McCain's campaign strategy, his reliance on Obama's association with Bill Ayers, and he found that to be small and petty. You know, Powell is not a partisan political figure. He has no political base, and he was part of the Bush administration, and he resigned and felt that he didn't want to continue there. It's hard to see how that would have really affected the votes of undecided people.
I don't think it had much impact, but again, to the extent it did, certainly it was welcome news for Barack Obama.
Another nail in the coffin.
That's what I'd say.
Yeah. Now, what about other Republicans like Scott McClellan or Christopher Buckley? Do you think they really counted for much?
Well, perhaps for those who make their electoral decisions based on the style page, perhaps. But I don't think Scott McClellan has a lot of political influence. I think Christopher Buckley generated a lot of PR for Tina Brown's new website, The Daily Beast, and probably for his own book, which has just come out. But fundamentally, I think the American people are voting on real issues of war and peace and economic well-being, and ultimately that's what I think explains Obama's near insurmountable lead.
Now, we talked about Palin, the world-famous hockey mom, and she says that she's now a political fixture. She's all but conceded the race because she said she wants to think about her political future. Do you think she's going to be the nominee in 4 years? And
well,
she's gotten any traction?
I guess what I would say is two things. First, I hope not. But what I've learned, given my remarks about what the Republican right was able to do to preclude McCain from, I think, following his instincts and choosing a centrist running mate, is they have a veto power, the social conservatives, inside the Republican Party. They also have a very strong constituency in the primaries, and I think that Sarah Palin will be a very competitive candidate going forward. She appears more relaxed on the campaign trail and more effective with each passing day. And if she's able to hold on to some of that $150,000 wardrobe she's gotten, she'll be an increasingly attractive and visible player on the national stage.
Boy, is this a partisan interview.
Well, I'm somebody who's worked for people like Mike Bloomberg and likes Joe Lieberman, who's hardly a partisan Democrat. So I'm really not a strong Democratic partisan. But Jim, what I would say to you is that it is very hard looking at this campaign and looking at this country to not react in a way that is partisan and supports the Democrats. Though I do hope after the election, and this is probably an interview for post November 4th, that the Democrats, if they have the power that I'm hypothesizing they will, govern in a truly bipartisan fashion.
Was it such an irrational decision to have selected Palin? I mean, after all, the Karl Rove patented strategy was energize the base, get those conservatives out there, get them voting. And she energized the base.
Well, it looked good for a couple of weeks, that's for sure. I think the problem I had with the strategy was not so much the reliance on the base, which probably in this election didn't offer enough support to win, but the fact that she was demonstrably and is demonstrably unqualified. And I don't think that her record and her term of service makes her somebody who could be anything other than Miss August rather than Miss November.
The selection of Biden, let's look at that for a minute.
Right.
King of the Gaff, said to be a windbag. Do you think that was a good choice for Obama, or would you have been happier with somebody else?
Well, I guess personally I might have been happier with somebody else. I had personal...
Hillary Clinton.
I like and have worked for Hillary Clinton, Evan Bayh. But I think Joe Biden certainly hasn't been a drag on the ticket. There have been a number of gaffes, but I think in terms of foreign policy bona fides, he has brought an enormous amount of heft and stature to the ticket. He certainly won the vice presidential debate. So while there have been some awkward moments on the campaign trail, I think he's been a net positive.
Was it smart to say that Obama is going to be tested internationally 6 months after he achieves office? My
reaction to that was he made an argument that would have been better and more effectively made by John McCain or Sarah Palin. And I hope he's wrong. My fear is that there may be more truth to what he said than any of us would care to see, but I think we all hope he is wrong and that we are not tested.
Well, on the campaign trail, it's often folly to make predictions. And
I've tried to stay as far away from being definitive as I can.
now, what about Obama's appeal with voters? I mean, here we have someone who arrives on the national scene, a first-term senator. People, I mean, Palin derided his record as a community organizer as if that was no record at all. How did he manage to capture the imagination of so many of the American people? And we'll find out Tuesday how many.
I think he tuned in when you mentioned the word vision before, Jim. He tuned into what the American people were looking for. An outsider, someone who could promote unity, bringing people together to produce results. And I think he hit a responsive chord in the electorate, both in the primaries and ultimately in the general election, that the American people responded to. And when you talk about, you know, his volunteer army or his fundraising, that's not by accident. People don't just look at a guy and just say, well, I'm going to go to work for him or give him money. They have to respond to a message. And I think that he's been a unique messenger with a distinctive message in a way that has really captivated America.
Well, the message was change, clearly, and certainly everybody wanted change after the last 8 years, if you look at the polls, or certainly almost everybody. And his message was a certain vision of hope, and we all want to have hope. But has he really told us what he will do and with any specificity?
I think he's stated his goals. You know, it was. I'll give you two perspectives on this. Sheldon Whitehouse, the first-term senator from Rhode Island, was interviewed in the New York Times last Sunday, and he said, look, you know, we're going to have big enough numbers, we can do what we want, we just can't wait on the Republicans. Chuck Schumer, our senior senator, said, well, what Obama has said is a list of goals and aspirations, and it's hard to talk about raising taxes, particularly the capital gains rate, when we're in the midst of a recession and with the kind of deficits we're running. It's hard to take on the kind of spending priorities Obama wants to. Let's call this an opening ante or a starting point. And I hope Schumer is closer to the truth than Whitehouse, because I think given the challenges we face, we do have to flesh out the Obama agenda, and hopefully it'll be more bipartisan than narrowly focused.
Now, he went into the campaign with certain negatives, surely, and a certain amount of baggage that the Republicans tried to exploit, either directly or implicitly. His alleged Muslim background, Reverend Wright, possible mistrust of Obama among Jewish voters, and none of that really seemed to stick. In your estimation, why didn't it stick?
Well, you're raising a bunch of different issues, and I guess what I would say would be part of it was that there was a tentativeness by both Senator Clinton and in some ways even Senator McCain about how and when to attack Senator Obama. That's part of it. But I think the larger issue is when you're facing the kind of economic crisis we're facing now, it's hard to make the case that ties to a 60s terrorist, however repugnant that terrorist may be, are enough, given that Obama has denounced him now, or denounced his actions certainly, to disqualify him from being elected president. And that does seem a little petty.
Let's talk for a moment about the issue of race. Senator McCain just said this week that race will play no part in the outcome of the election. Do you agree with him on that?
Well, it shouldn't, that's for sure. What kind of a role? Probably a complicated role in the outcome. I think there'll undeniably be African Americans who will vote for Obama because he's black, out of justifiable racial or ethnic pride. There'll be some whites, I suspect, working class whites who vote against him for concerns about race. There also will be people of all races, creeds, and colors who are inspired, particularly younger voters and new voters. How that will all net out, I think it's impossible to say today, but I certainly hope and expect that when the votes are tallied on Tuesday night, Wednesday morning, that we don't have to conclude that there was the so-called Bradley effect that retarded the level of support that Obama was expected to get. I hope that that doesn't happen.
Well, there may be a reverse Bradley effect. There may be people who tell pollsters that they're for McCain, but when they get in the booth, they'll vote for Obama.
Certainly, and people who are stimulated to vote for Obama because he is a new face and an African American and not part of the system. And if that happens, I think that is all to the good.
What about McCain's age?
You know, I've increasingly felt, Jim, that running for president is more like an athletic event and a marathon, if you will, than it is a intellectually stimulating debate and dialogue about vision. And to me, McCain has looked older and older as time has went on. And so I would say that while I don't think people vote against somebody because of their age, nonetheless, the contrast between Obama and McCain in terms of their appearance and how they've sounded probably has not worked to McCain's advantage.
Let's talk about polls, because that's your area.
Indeed.
We're besieged by polls. There's so many polls. There's Gallup and Zogby and Rasmussen. We don't know whom to believe, and they often vary dramatically as to the outcome. And then we have, and Americans, have, and particularly in this election, have become addicted to polls. There are people who, at the office, are going on the net trying to find out what the latest Zogby poll says. And then you have these bloggers who are on 538.com, which is kind of an agglomeration of all the polls. They give Obama 96% chance of success. Pollster.com, realpolitics.com had 7 million users last month, according to the reports. What do you make of this trend? Why are so many Americans interested in how other Americans are supposed to vote?
Well, look, I think it's good that people are interested in politics. I think when we've added a new disease to sort of pop psychology, which is obsession with polls, and people talk about breaking their addiction to realclearpolitics.com, we've gone a little too far. I think one of the other things that's happened in the election, Jim, is we're so focused on polls and horse races to the exclusion of the issues that there are more people I know who say, well, I'm really not concerned about their position on Iraq. Where do they stand in terms of the vote in Western Pennsylvania? I think that's to the detriment of the system.
What about polling techniques? Rasmussen uses interactive voice response. You hear a recording,
right,
and it polls your sentiments in the election, while CNN has a live operator, a questioner who asks you how you vote. Does that make any difference?
Well, I think it does, and I think it remains to be seen which one is more accurate. There are problems with both. The problems with recording is, you know, there's a self-selection bias, and you have to weight the results to get a demographically representative sample. Problem with live calling is, again, you know, there's not a unanimity of voice, there's not a unanimity of respondent selection, and I can tell you, as somebody who's been in the business and has done, you know, say a poll of 500 a night for 4 nights, which nets out to say +6 hypothetically for Obama, you can get variation on a night-to-night basis that can be as much as 10% either way. So polling is as much an art as it is a science, and I don't think I or anybody else can sit here and tell you with certainty what the best methodology is. We can really rather point holes or take questions about different approaches and different polls. Probably the best thing to do is to just average the polls, discard the outliers, look where things fall, and that's probably the best approximation.
Now, I heard Ed Rollins say the other night, this whole thing is of polling is nonsense, because a lot of the Obama responses come from people with cell phones. It's a new category of Obama supporter, people with cell phones. And he said, well, you don't know who's at the other end of the line, and you may not find them, and cell phone people are unlikely to vote. Is there anything to that at all?
Well, I think it's certainly true that we don't know a lot about cell phone people, but what I think we do know is that they're more likely to be younger, liberal, and democratic than are their counterparts who use landlines. The other thing, though, about what Rollins says is that when Republicans fall behind, they tend to try to cast aspersions at the polls, and Democrats, to be fair, have been known to do the same thing. I think what polling does is it gives you an approximation of where the race stands, but anyone who sits here or is on network TV and says that they can predict the results with certainty is either very lucky or not telling the truth.
Now, you referred before to the congressional races.
Yes.
I think almost everyone who's looked at it agrees that the Democrats will retain their control of the House of Representatives. The issue is, there'll be Democratic control of the Senate, but will it be filibuster-proof? Do you think they'll have 60 votes?
I don't think they're going to get to 60, Jim. I think they'll get to 57, maybe 58, but I don't see them winning Mississippi. I have doubts about Kentucky. And as I look at the electoral map, I think I see 5 or 6, maybe 7 pickups, but I don't see them going beyond that.
Now, many have said we are facing the most daunting presidency since Franklin Delano Roosevelt. Comparable, perhaps, to the challenges faced by George Washington and Abraham Lincoln and certainly Roosevelt. I mean, and there are so many issues that might be prioritized: nuclear proliferation, energy policy and trade, the Middle East, the greater Middle East, Afghanistan, Pakistan. What do you think the next president should have learned from the last 8 years and the mistakes of the last 8 years that he can bring to bear on these problems?
I am one of those, as you could tell by my remarks earlier, who's committed to a much more bipartisan approach to governing than George Bush has taken. I worked for Bill Clinton, after all, who, despite whatever problems there might have been early on in his administration, was able to move to the center and produce a balanced budget and a bipartisan coalition to protect social programs and provide fiscal stability, and also reduce tax rates. So I think that that's where the American people are, and I think as we go forward to attack some of the daunting problems you speak of, we need to have a much firmer grasp on what the critical center of the American electorate wants and try to govern from that perspective rather than trying to govern from a left or a right-wing ideological extreme.
And also, it must be said, in fairness, not everything that Bush did is wrong. I mean, he certainly unprecedented aid to Africa for HIV/AIDS, and the strategic breakthrough with India, and North Korea appears to be curbed. Brazil. There's been great progress as an anchor of centrist South America. So certainly one would hope that the next president doesn't reject those advances and achievements.
I would agree with that. I would only say that much of Bush 2 is a repudiation of the approach of Bush 1. But that being said, I think that we really have to build on whatever successes there are. And something Peggy Noonan wrote a week or so ago, 43%, even if that be the base Republican vote, ain't nothing. And to govern as if they don't exist, I think, is equally flawed to governing in the way Bush and Cheney have governed.
Well, Doug Schoen, I'll give you a chance to redeem yourself.
Okay.
Because when you were last on our program in December, you told us that you thought the next president would be Hillary Clinton.
I did.
So I ask you, do you think it's going to be an Obama landslide?
I think it'll be an Obama victory by 6 or 7 points. And while I think I wrote in my penultimate book, Power of the Vote, that it would be John McCain and Hillary Clinton as the nominees and Hillary Clinton elected, I think it's fair to say that there's about as little likelihood that Hillary will be elected as John McCain elected.
Doug Schoen, thank you for coming by.
I appreciate it.
And thank you for coming by. Tune in next week for more on the digital age. For the digital age, I'm Jim Zirin. Thank you, good night, and all the best.